Welcome to Achieving Broader Impacts of Research Through Policy Change. This is part of MSU's Broader Impacts Workshop Series. I'm Miles McNally, your host and the Director for Community-Based Research in the Office of Engagement. Are you eager to see your research shape today's policy debates? Are you looking for creative, high-impact ways to get your work in front of policymakers? Then this workshop is for you. Today, we're joined by two experts in bridging research and policy, Matt Grossman and Arnold Weinfeld. They'll share insights on how to deliver research-based information in ways that are timely, relevant, and influential in the policymaking process. Let me introduce our speakers. Dr. Matt Grossman is Director of the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research, also known as IPPSR, and Professor of Political Science at Michigan State University. Recently, Dr. Grossman published How Social Science Got Better, Overcoming Bias with More Evidence, Diversity, and Self-Reflection. The book covers the topics of Trump's election, the Great Recession, what makes humans unique, models of infectious disease, social immobility, and racial bias in policing. His book, Red State Blues, How the Conservative Revolution Stalled in the States, finds that while the Republican Party has gained substantial political control of state governments, it has largely failed to enact policies that advance conservative goals. Dr. Grossman is also co-author of Asymmetric Politics, Ideological Republicans and Group Interest Democrats, with David Hopkins, and winner of the Leon Epstein Outstanding Book Award from the American Political Science Association. Dr. Grossman's previous books include Artists of the Possible, Governing Networks and American Policy Change Since 1945, and the Not-So-Special Interest Groups, Public Representation and American Governance. He is also co-author of Campaigns and Elections, the leading elections textbook from W.W. Norton. Dr. Grossman is a senior fellow at the Niskanen, I hope I pronounced that right, Center in Washington, D.C., host of the Science of Politics podcast, and a regular contributor to 538's online political analysis. He has also published op-eds in the New York Times and the Washington Post, some of which I've had the pleasure to read myself. Arnold Weinfeld is Director for Workforce and Economic Development Partnerships in the Office of Public Engagement and Scholarship at Michigan State University. In this capacity, he works collaboratively with the Center for Community Economic Development and serves as a connector and boundary spanner, working with MSU faculty, community partners, and agencies to develop university-community partnerships focused on urban and systems change. He participates in and leads community-based research and evaluation projects, working to promote community-based participatory research models of science. As Associate Director of Michigan State University's Institute for Public Policy and Social Research, Weinfeld also works to cross boundaries and connect directly with IPPSR's 60-plus affiliated faculty, student fellows, newly established training programs, and state policy research programs. Turn it over now to Matt and Arnold.
Thank you, Miles. Greatly appreciate that introduction and welcome to everyone today. As Miles noted, my name is Arnold Weinfeld. I'm Associate Director at the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research, which is located, for those of you that don't know, in the College of Social Science. And with us here today, you'll be hearing from Dr. Matt Grossman, IPPSR Director, as well as a panel of faculty that have interacted with legislators as they've tried to advance their own research and initiatives. As Miles noted, please introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know your affiliation and what research you might be involved in right now that could have policy implications. So I'm going to share my screen now as I introduce you to the Institute and talk a bit about our services. So the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research in the College of Social Science provides a number of different services, in particular in education and training. Our main mission is to forward the work that faculty are doing on campus in public policy arenas. And we do that through a number of ways that I'll discuss. We host public policy forums at the downtown, at the Capitol downtown, every month that the legislature is in session. Once a month, a luncheon forum that is open to the public. And so we get a mix of legislative staff, legislators, stakeholders, and the like. And we feature topics that legislators are and policymakers are moving through at that particular time. And we like to also feature that faculty that are working on issues that legislators and their staff could use that information. The media often covers these forums. We provide lunch, and it's just a great way for us to introduce faculty to the Capital area group, and so that they understand the work that people are doing. As I said, we have these once a month while the legislature is in session. Since we have a full-time legislature, it's about 9 or 10 months a year that we do this. We also have political leadership programs at IPPSR. I think our biggest ones include our Michigan Political Leadership Program. This is a bipartisan program where we take on 24 people from across the state, 12 Democrats, 12 Republicans. So we keep it as bipartisan as possible, and we also adhere to geographic representation. These are typically folks that have an interest in local politics. Maybe they're serving on a planning commission or a board, but more importantly, they are interested in maybe running for local or state office at some point in their careers. We take them through a 10-month, 1 weekend a month program that incorporates practical politics, public policy analysis and process, personal leadership development, and effective governance. And to date, I think we've had over 700 graduates of this program, which is now about 30 years old. And several have gone on to run for local and state office. A good example is Jocelyn Benson, our Secretary of State, is a graduate of the MPLP program. I believe we have 15 legislators between the House and the Senate that are graduates of the MPLP program. And so it serves as a jumping off point, and those that take the program, I think it's 60 or 65% of them that run for office win their elections. Our legislative leadership program we do once every 2 years after the November election. And it is a program where we bring in the freshman legislators to engage in small group sessions, both with university faculty and with content experts from across the state, before they hit the ground running in their first legislative sessions, with a series of specifically designed events around some major issues such as the Michigan budget, for instance. But again, here again, we also bring in faculty and others to talk about everything from K-12 education to healthcare, the environmental issues, and the like. And then we work to stay in touch with those legislators as they get into the legislature to see how else we can work with them moving forward. So one program that has been very effective for us in linking IPPSR with faculty is our Michigan Applied Public Policy Research Program. These are small grants that we make available to faculty working on current policy issues. They're about $25,000 a grant on an annual basis, with 1 year to complete the research project, and then present findings in a report or briefing for a general audience. Of course, the focus is on a current policy relevant issue in Michigan. We send out the call for proposals in June, with decisions made in early August, and then once you receive your budget in early September, you're off and running. If you go to our website, ipser.msu.edu, you can look up the MAPPR program and see the types of projects that we have funded over the course of time. But as you see, it has varied from everything from the substitute teacher shortage to workforce housing, an environmental area, online 5, school safety, chronic wasting disease, redistricting, any number of issues. And during the time you're doing the research, we also work with you to help promote that research along the way, especially if you have some findings that you're coming up with during that time. We work with you to move that forward and out into the public space or with certain policymakers so that they're aware that this research is taking place. And certainly afterwards, through our other mediums, I'll talk about our podcast in a moment. Certainly through our forums that I mentioned earlier, we can work with you to present that information to the broader public and policymakers at large. One other aspect that we house is a survey research team. The Office of Survey Research is located in IPSR, and it works with faculty members. It also has contracts with state departments as well, and oversees the completion of thousands of interviews. It's a university-based survey research unit that over time has stayed current on best practices, as well as advances in sampling and data collection methodologies. So it often happens that we'll be working with a MAPPR grantee, and part of their work is survey research. And we'll work them through our Office of Survey Research to help them do that. We also, once a year, or maybe a few times a year, Matt can speak to this specifically, have a state of the state survey that we do across the state as well. That's very well regarded. And I mentioned our podcast. So our podcast is one of those services, along with our forums, along with our policy wonk blog, where we're able to forward your research and work that you're doing in areas of public policy. We do this once a month through MSU Studios on campus. Russ White, who some of you might be familiar with, is the host. Dr. Grossman as IPSR director, and Dr. Charlie Ballard, professor emeritus here at MSU in economics, leads a discussion of policy and current events, and then we move to a specific topic that we'll have a guest on for half of the show to talk about the work that they're doing. So as you're moving about your work in public policy areas, research that you may be undertaking, grants that you may be seeking as well, think about how IPSR can be of help to you in moving forward that proposal as you seek funding. I'm going to stop sharing now, and we can take questions now, Matt, or we can wait until after your presentation. How would you like to do it?
I think it's fine if anybody has questions about the services that Arnold mentioned to raise them now.
Go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like, and we can call on you.
A couple quick notes of extension. Yes, we run a regular survey of people in Michigan 3 times a year. We also now run a national U.S. survey once a year that you can buy onto with a few questions and take advantage of the multi-investigator survey. And we have an elite survey that's going to be going out soon of people who are involved in Michigan policymaking and government that will be going out over the summer as well. So any of those are opportunities and can be sort of added on to projects or grants. Looks like Miles has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. So let's pretend I'm a researcher. I'm working on an NSF proposal. My broader impacts plan includes some sort of policy impact because I think that the findings from my research are going to be policy relevant, but I don't really have any relationship with any policymakers, and I don't know how to go about doing that and getting my research findings in front of people for whom it would be relevant. If I were to call up IPPSR, would you be able to help me with that? And how should I go about doing that?
We do. So there's kind of two routes in. One is to apply to the grant program that Arnold mentioned in May and June, and you'll be hearing from a few graduates of that program soon. And then it is kind of an evolution from you're producing some work for policymakers. We're helping to hone it for policy audiences. And you have a product in addition to the research project that is more of a memo aimed at policymakers. But if you're in another route is if you are in the middle of proposing a grant and you want to include some of what Arnold said in the grant, it can be quite inexpensive compared to other components of outreach to just talk to us about coming up with a budget that allows you to have outreach to policymakers. For example, includes a form presentation or includes a evaluation of what policymakers think of the research findings in the policymaker survey, or it has a component that could be included in a staff training that we provide to legislative staff. So we're happy to, or a survey-based project. We do that regularly where we provide budgets for people who are doing that. And we're used to both the ask of, I just have this amount, what can I do for that amount, versus, here's what I want to do and how much would that cost.
Thank you, Miles. Any other questions right now? All right, Matt?
Yeah, just I guess we sort of assumed the pitch that you wanted to speak to policymakers, and that brought our audience here. But it is worth just sort of pointing out that a lot of research projects, when we talk about broader impacts, we get to public presentations or people who might interact in schools or museums or something like that. But in terms of kind of making impact in the real world, it is useful to think about public policy, because lots of your research findings will interact with policy. And if you can get something in front of policymakers, it might have quite the impact compared to trying to work with one member of the public at a time. All are valuable, but there is a reason why people are often interested in the particular policy implications of their research. So given that you do want some communication with policymakers, you do have to understand some of the basic differences in approach. And I apologize if this is review for some folks, but it's always helpful to kind of remind ourselves that this is a gulf that we're trying to bridge here. Policymakers, for example, are usually interested in information that is immediately relevant to a decision. That means something's on their plate. They need to help make a decision about it, and you're giving them information that helps them to make that decision. We, of course, are often interested in what is most important to general knowledge. It may be way more important to figure out broad causes of, say, a particular category of crime increasing over time, that aren't that associated with any levers that the policymaker currently controls. There's also different concerns. They're going to have concerns over feasibility. How likely are we able to actually implement this? About constituency reaction. Even if it might work in the long run, how are people likely to react along the way? So there's going to be a lot of concern about implementation, but also about appearance and about consistency with values, things that you may not have to consider in the research project. But we also have concerns that may not be readily apparent to them. We're concerned with things like precise measurement and causal inference, generalizability from the people that we actually studied to broader groups. That doesn't mean that we can't raise those with policymakers. They're just not the immediate concerns of the policymakers compared to us. They also have different sources of knowledge. So, of course, we do bring important knowledge, but that doesn't mean that they don't have knowledge that they can share with you that makes it more of a two-way street. They, in particular, have a lot of knowledge about what's been tried before. They also have knowledge about what's under their control, and they have knowledge about how people are likely to react to a proposal, a finding, a point of emphasis, or language that we use. But you have knowledge that is particularly important to them. Often that is knowledge of policy variation. Just other states do it differently. Here's how they do it. Or other localities do it differently. Here's how they do it. And you have knowledge of potential effects beyond those that are already incorporated. There may be unintended consequences of particular policy tools. And of course, you have knowledge about uncertainty and all kinds of other things that might come up that aren't being in current consideration. So both sort of parties have knowledge, and we have to acknowledge that. But if you put that together, it can present quite a gulf. Now, this is the most stereotyped version, so I'm not saying everybody is in this camp, but it can mean that what policymakers want are the immediate and definitive answers about the size of problems and often the effects of small changes. That is, they want to be able to choose small levers that make big differences. And they want that information to come from well-known experts who nonetheless are disinterested. That is, they don't come from a particular political perspective or are not known to do that. And that is usually hard to find. We often are known in part because we have a perspective on policy. And of course, large changes often require, large social changes often require large policy levers, not small ones that are under their control. So I'm not saying don't propose big changes when big changes are necessary. I'm just sort of saying it's often quite different from where policymakers start. But we also can be sort of staying on our side of the gulf. In fact, we often offer something that looks like, given my latest research, here's what I would do if I were king for the day. And let me show you all this data that proves that. And by the way, we need additional funding to support my area of research. So that is pretty far from where policymakers start. And it's just important to think about trying to bridge that a little bit. To give you some context, particularly at the state and local level where we often work, you can think of a state level legislative office as bringing people from all kinds of walks of life who are assisted by a couple of usually overworked people who are basically recent graduates of MSU, often explicitly, but even if they aren't, you can think of them as students who just started out, and that's usually the kind of capacity that a legislative office brings with it. That means that they are often reliant on outsiders, both people within the legislature and the policymaking community, and you. And it means that you can be quite helpful, but it also means that they may not start with the kind of background information that you're usually able to assume. At the local level, in Michigan, about 45% of the highest ranking local officials have college degrees at all. And in terms of credentials and policymaking knowledge, it goes both up and down from there. But you can think of a lot of people as really not having much background in particular your policy area. So what can you do? Well, one thing that we try to help you do with all of our services is to develop a reputation for responsive, informed, and straight evidence that comes with useful examples. So if you're the kind of person that when you are talking to policymakers, you try to do your best to answer their questions and you provide as much straight evidence as you can with examples that they can use and explain to other people, that goes to your benefit. That means that we have to come prepared, not just with what our research findings demonstrate, but knowledge about the government and the ask that we're engaged in. What can each decision maker at each level of government do? What success stories are there from other actors in similar positions or similar levels of government that have made choices that are relevant to the research that you're suggesting? You can also, of course, come to learn as well as teach. That is, you always want to enter with your own clear questions. And obviously, one of the main strategies for decision makers is to make it seem like it was their idea. If you are pitching something that seems like it comes about as a result of the reciprocal relationship between you, all the better for moving that forward. You also want to have a plausible ask. So, given the values, the constituency, and the priorities of the person that you are talking to, what are realistic and impactful first steps that they can take? So, it could just be another meeting involving slightly more people. It could be that you want to meet in person, whereas you started with a conversation. It could be that you're going to present you're going to provide some basic details that they requested for and ask for follow-up. So we will be sending, there's no PowerPoint, but we will be sending these notes along with you. You also have some advantages. You are not a lobbyist. That is, you're not asking directly for more money from the university usually. And you are, more disinterested than most of the people that they talk to. You have a broader perspective, and you may not be, directly selling one thing, but open to many possibilities. You're also an expert, and that means that you have knowledge across a broader scope and a much longer time horizon than others do. You also have access to relevant data and prior experience and the ability to interpret data and alleviate misinformation or misunderstanding. And you have a network of colleagues with related expertise, not just yourself. So when you come from MSU as a professor who is interested in, say, public health for young people, yes, you have the results of your latest research and ventures, but you also know a whole lot of people and research findings that might be relevant. And often policymakers ask us to kind of speak on behalf of a literature or a discipline beyond our own research. That can be a big part of your advantage in speaking with them. You should also, though, know your perceived perspectives. So to be blunt, first of all, you're going to be considered likely to be liberals coming from the left side of the political spectrum. Professors are disproportionately Democrats, disproportionately not conservatives. MSU does not have the crazy leftist campus vibe. We can call Ann Arbor for that. But we're still going to be perceived as taking one side in a political perspective. But we're also often perceived as elitists. That is, we might, represent the left side, but even if we're talking to Democrats or people who share our vision, we're still going to be considered as people who are more technocratic, from universities, don't look a lot like their constituents, and even sometimes can look down upon people who are less educated than themselves. That doesn't mean everybody is those things. It's just worth thinking about how you are perceived just as a base point of you're a researcher talking to policymakers. So we usually do a bit of exercise here, but we can't do it in the online form. But it could be useful for your own understanding to think about a pitch that you might be having and to imagine two legislators, one that is interested in the research that you are doing, but is not aligned with the political side that is usually associated with interest in that research or policy levers to bring it about, who is sort of skeptical of the motivations behind the research, and think about how you might get past that block. And then to also pretend or think about meeting with another legislator who maybe is more associated with the typical political side that supports policy tools that you are promoting, but views you as too much of a technocrat and somebody who's kind of out of touch with their constituents, how you would think about making the approach with that kind of policymaker as well. We can help with all of this. I'll send these notes, but that's just an overview to get you started thinking about the Gulf and how to bridge it.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions at this time? Any thoughts? I see some people have introduced themselves and noted some of the work that they're doing. Any of those folks have any thoughts for discussion?
Anyone want to try to make a pitch for pretend that they're speaking with some legislators? You get to talk about your research to the group.
I see Johnny wants to make a pitch.
All right, let's hear it.
Yeah, I don't have any pitch, but I just want to ask the outreach. If I understand correctly from what you are saying, you are interested in local and national uh, policymakers, but university has an international reach. So, what kind of offer can you make for us who are working on international decision makers?
We IPPSR cannot directly help you usually link with those policymakers more than you can on your own, but some of the tools that we offer are useful for those broader audiences, and we can help craft language, use research to convert it to things that look more like policymakers might be useful to see. So we can offer some help, but we also admit our limitations compared to other sources you might have.
Not to pick on anyone, but Jill Von Drasik, I hope I pronounced that correctly. I see you with our Charles Stewart Mott, Department of Public Health, Communications Director. Are there links to some of the folks that you work with, especially in terms of maternal health and health outcomes in general? We've certainly funded a few of the of our health-related issues through our MAPPA program, and given current times, those are probably going to be larger issues moving forward. Any thoughts as to how you may be able to link your work with the Institute and/or public policy in general?
Well, we
Yeah,
have a success story to tout on the RX Kids, it looks like. So go ahead.
yeah. So, why I'm participating today and what I'm interested in learning is how communications can work more closely with influencing policy in the work that we do. So where I see opportunity moving forward is significant when we think about like public health. So like, how can I use IPS or collaborate more closely with IPSR from that communications to connect from a storytelling perspective, the impact of what we do, how it impacts our communities, individual people, like the communities that our legislators represent and why they should care. And with RX Kids, since you brought that one up, is a public-private funding approach with immediate impact, so we can very quickly share the data in the local impacts and how the money is supporting economic economic impacts within the community. So I'm really interested in how we can apply this to more of our research programs and more of our maternal health work and getting some of these PIs and leaders of our research programs connected with our legislators at a higher level beyond just ARCS kids. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Mhm.
How are we doing on our faculty panel, Arnold? Are we
Yeah, they're all here, so
okay?
we can move ahead with the panel and maybe instigate a little bit more conversation. So let me do
But
that.
if anybody does want more one-on-one consultation with Arnold or I, just get in touch, and we're happy to help.
So as I noted at the beginning, we do have a faculty panel to talk about their experiences in advancing their programs, research, and initiatives with legislators. So let me introduce them, and we'll get them chatting. Dr. Brian Beverly, who's currently the director of the Office of K-12 Outreach, I'm sorry, of Outreach in the College of Education. His work there is centered around school turnaround efforts and instructional leadership. Dr. Beverly is a lifelong Michigan resident and takes pride in the quality of education he received in public schools, with a passion about providing similar impactful experiences with students in today's schools. He holds a PhD in educational policy from Michigan State University, is an alum and co-coordinator of Michigan's Educational Policy Fellowship Program, and is a former member of the Lansing Board of Education. Joining Dr. Beverly will be Dr. Rex Lamore, who's director of the MSU Center for Community and Economic Development and a member of the faculty of the Urban and Regional Planning Program. Dr. Lamore has more than 35 years of experience in community and economic development and has focused his career on the unique challenges of revitalizing distressed communities and policies and practices related to promoting equitable and sustainable development. Dr. Lamore's instructional roles include teaching environmental planning and co-teaching MSU's Urban Planning Field Practicum course for undergraduate and graduate students. The third person on our panel is Dr. Sandra Lupian, who is Director of Mass Timber at MSU, a program at Michigan State University that harnesses outreach, communications, research, education policy, and partnerships to advance mass timber construction and manufacture in Michigan and the surrounding region. Dr. Lupian has 2 decades of diverse policy communications, external affairs, and leadership experience in the nonprofit, public, and private sectors, most of it working at the intersection of climate change, natural resource policy, and equitable and sustainable development. Immediately before joining MSU in July of 2021, Sandra served as Deputy Director for External Affairs and Communications in the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research and the California Strategic Growth Council. And so one of the reasons we brought these three to us today is to, again, discuss their own experiences. Each of them is a MAPPER recipient. And so we've worked with them in the past. And if you noticed, as I introduced them, the word policy came up in each of their descriptions as well. So these three are well steeped in the intersection of research and public policy. And with that, I think we'll just go in alphabetical order. And so that means Dr. Beverly, if you could be up first and discuss your own experiences over the course of time interacting with legislators as you've moved to advance various research initiatives.
Thanks, Arnold and Matt. Appreciate the invitation, and hello to my fellow panelists and to the participants today. It's a pleasure to be with you. As part of Arnold's introduction, he mentioned the Education Policy Fellowship Program, of which I've been co-coordinator for the last several years. It is a mid-career professional development program for educators and those in education adjacent organizations, school districts, Michigan Department of Education, associations, think tanks, higher ed, and other spaces who come together to learn more about education policy. Part of the program focuses on leadership, obviously focused on policy, but also on networking, considering the vast network that all of them currently are engaged with their own personal networks, and then bringing forth experts in education policy to expand their thinking, but also expand their network, and then also providing them with expertise around advocacy strategies to engage lawmakers, bureaucrats, and to think about how to engage others in partnership to advocate for the profession of education. We also spend a good deal actually engaging with legislators. We spend a day at the Michigan Capitol advocating, meeting with the folks on the various education committees and appropriations. We ask that our fellows prepare policy briefs so that they have some organized talking points when they engage with those legislators. Additionally, this group participates in the Washington Policy Seminar, engaging with other cohorts of EPFP in DC, and then we spend a day on the Hill, engaging with the Michigan delegation, again, advocating for all things education in and around the state. Similarly, the Office of K-12 Outreach has been engaged in distributing and publishing scholarship, most notably of recent in collaboration with Dr. David Arson and some others, the Rural Education Report that's hosted on our website. Additionally, in response to the Governor's Council on Grow Michigan Together, we published a paper that highlights the need to focus on public education in that particular space. And then in collaboration with some faculty at the University of Michigan, we published a State of the Educator Workforce in Michigan, a report that was in partnership with the Michigan Alliance for Student Opportunity. A lot of our work in our office collaborates with a number of the education associations around the state. Michigan Association for Superintendents and Administrators, the Elementary School Principals Association, Secondary Schools Principals Association, as well as Michigan Virtual and some others. Again, trying to build partnerships, both in programming, but also in advocacy roles, engaging any and everyone who will listen to talk about strengthening the profession of education. Some of that work also includes participation in at the Mackinac Policy Conference. Every year I've been fortunate to attend, meeting with legislators, meeting with state administrators, hearing what they would like to know more about around the field of education, but then also, again, advocating for the profession as a whole. And then lastly, I'll mention for several years prior to the pandemic, we hosted a series of president's education forums through some funding through MSU's president, which allowed College of Education faculty the opportunity to present current research and the latest thinking around education policy, hosted at the Radisson, which is a short walk from the state capitol. So we would invite legislators and their staffers to attend those conferences and those talks, and they were well attended. And we're hoping to partner with some folks here in the college to re-engage that work here in the near future.
Thank you, Dr. Beverly. And we'll get into maybe some of your more personal interactions and what's worked and what hasn't as we move along.
Sure.
Dr. Lamore, you're next. And I have to say I've had the pleasure of working with and being affiliated with Dr. Lamore and his Center for for some number of years. So I know he has, over the course of time, had many interactions with local, state, and even federal policymakers on issues that he's been working on. So, Dr. Lamore, tell us about some of your own experiences.
Well, thank you, Arnold. I appreciate that introduction. And I want to thank you and Matt for the work that you and IPPSR do to support our outreach engagement around policy initiatives. I know I've had the experience of working with you and others in IPPSR over the years, and I find the group to have great expertise. And thank you very much for helping us fulfill our land grant mission and bringing knowledge to bear on some of the societal challenges we're all facing. And I think Matt made a very excellent summary of some of the key tips in thinking about, if you have not done this before, what kinds of things might you think about in preparation for a good interaction with policymakers. So I will share a couple of perspectives on this. Our work over the years has really touched at several levels of policymaking, local, state, and federal. Some of our federal work several years ago was really supported through some of our federal leadership. Some of you may recall, I don't know, there's probably not that many on this call that recall Senator Don Regal, who chaired our Banking and Urban Affairs Committee. And we had worked with Senator Regal on advancing what we called the Community Outreach Partnership Act, which was a federal piece of legislation targeting HUD to support, similar to what our U.S. Department of Agriculture does in supporting the research and outreach agenda of land-grant universities with the focus on urban issues. And he was very supportive of that. And we were able to get that enabling legislation passed. And for those of you who are familiar with the importance of how things actually occur, enabling legislation only gets you so far. You need to have an appropriation that follows that. Fortunately, at that time, the chair of the HUD and Special Agencies Appropriation Committee in the House was a representative from the city of Saginaw, Bob Traxler. Some of you may have known Bob. He became one of our trustees after his term of service in Washington. And I'll never forget the day meeting with Congressman Traxler talking about HUD and special agencies and the possibility of appropriating funds to the Community Outreach Partnership Act, and his response being, nobody ever comes to talk to me about HUD. All you all want to talk about is NSF and NIH. And we were fortunate with his position and leadership in that time to actually get that appropriations in place. And that act is still on the books, and we were successful in securing funding, as were several other universities across the United States, to expand our urban outreach efforts. Now, the devil's in the details, right? So here's another, if you're interested in making sure your policy is effective in addressing the concerns that you are focused on, in this particular case, the Clinton administration promulgated a set of rules that went counter to the advice that we were suggesting, which was the 100-year relationship that land-grant universities have with the U.S. Department of Agriculture to support our research and outreach agenda. What Clinton wanted to do, what his administrative team wanted to do in HUD, was spread the money around. And so they limited our funding portfolio to a 3-year cycle, which of course killed any long-term constituent base for any of it, because if we can't get any more funding out of it, why would we support it? So unfortunately, that program is no longer appropriated funds in the federal level, though it's still on the books. The Community Outreach Partnership Act still exists, and if we had a more supportive, positive administration to engage universities around urban research and outreach, we might be able to get some additional appropriations to reinstitute that work. So anyway, some of that is an example of a couple of things I wanted to share and complementing what Matt was saying. One is try not to make your first contact with key policy leaders an ask. If you can make that contact in some other way, so they know who you are, they know the work you're doing, and they know the interests that you have, then at the later date when you come with your information, education for them, they see that your interests and their interests align. In our case, in Senator Regal's case, and we've done this in other events as well, we recognized him for his leadership as chair of the Banking and Urban Affairs Committee, and we gave him a plaque and things like that at a major conference that we were hosting. So think about not making your first contact the contact where you're saying, hey, can you help us with this? Try to make it in some other format. The other item I would offer, and again, I want to thank Matt for his excellent summary of excellent tips. Present your materials in a very, I'll say the word, simple format. Infographics are great. Pictures are important, highlighting the important information that you need to convey to the policymaker. They get lost in the tables. They get lost in the narrative that we are trained in our disciplines to prepare. They don't get it. They don't care. Show them a picture, pie charts, bar charts. That's about it. Second and thirdly, I'd offer another perspective, and I think Matt may have touched upon this. Don't go by yourself. That being just the university. If there's other partners that you can bring to the table with you, and the colleagues who share your knowledge, who share your perspective, who are supportive of the information you're trying to communicate, bring those, particularly if you can find them from the policymakers' constituency community, so that they see a friendly face at the table. They say, oh, this is important to me, and my people, my constituents value what this academic unit is presenting to me. I would offer just a couple more items. Talk with staff. Don't be afraid to talk with the staff. They can handle the details usually a little better than the elected official directly, and they talk to their supervisors. So usually the information gets back, and then be patient. Oh my gosh, just be patient. Don't give up. Keep in there, and if your research is sound, if your materials are important, being patient and persistent, you eventually, hopefully, you will be successful in guiding our decision makers to make the right kinds of decisions. So those would just be the things I would offer. We can talk more about examples of local or state activities that we've been engaged in. But again, I think our colleagues at IPPSR are a great resource base for us, and I would encourage those who have not gone down this path before to lean on them for their advice and expertise.
Thank you, Rex. Great advice indeed. Dr. Lupian, you two have had just a little bit of experience working with policymakers, not just here in Michigan, but in other parts of the country as well. Why don't you talk for a moment about your own experiences?
Thank you. Thanks so much, Arnold. And I know you said no slides, but just because the thing I work on is incredibly visual, I'm just going to show a few. So first of all, I must make a correction out of respect for my esteemed colleagues who do have a PhD. I do not. You cannot please call me doctor. I do have a Master of Public Policy, however, and that's kind of that's how I roll. So I'm Sandra Lupien, and the program I lead is called Mass Timber at MSU, and we are focused on advancing mass timber construction and manufacture in Michigan, the Great Lakes region, and beyond, which Arnold said in the earlier introduction. And I just want you to see what mass timber is. It's an umbrella term for a variety of really big engineered wood construction materials that we can use in ways in big buildings that we've typically used steel or concrete to build more beautifully, often more efficiently, and certainly more sustainably. And here's a picture of mass timber in action in the STEM teaching and learning facility on the MSU campus. So many of you have probably been in there. But I find that if I don't explain what it is, people are distracted by wondering what it is. So that's mass timber. So like I said, because this enables us to build more beautifully, often more efficiently, more sustainably, while creating markets for forest health and resilience management, and creating new jobs in rural and forested communities, as well as in manufacturing sectors, I know from a policy perspective which decision makers could be interested in mass timber and which aspects of mass timber are most interesting to them. And one thing that is super cool about the thing I work on, which is not the case for most things that maybe are considered climate change solutions, is that there's interest on both sides of the aisle from a rural economic development perspective and in like an urban environment where people want to reduce the carbon footprints of their built environment. So it's a pretty special little spot that I get to work in, and that hasn't always been the case for me. So I'm going to provide some tips. Well, mostly what I'm going to do is provide examples from my work and during doing mass timber at MSU specifically, and then talk a little bit about the impacts that we're seeing from some of our work. So the first thing that I want to say is accept invitations to be in the room, right? If somebody is working on something related to an upcoming policy and your expertise are helpful and they ask you to be there, accept if you can. For example, the city of East Lansing received a proposal to change its zoning code to incentivize mass timber for early adopters. In response, the city assembled a mass timber study committee to make recommendations to the council, and I, along with my colleague George Berghorn at MSU Construction Management, were asked to join that committee. The findings of the committee ended up resulting in a more inclusive zoning ordinance change that would create development incentives for both mass timber, but also for certain LEED compliant projects and an increase in affordable housing units. And this incentive was adopted in fall of 2024. So by being able to bring mass timber expertise to that committee, share those with the policymakers, they were able to see that having an incentive could be very helpful for people who are early adopters of mass timber. But really what's true is more often than not, you're not going to be invited to be in the room. So don't wait. Ask to be in the room, right? Here's an example. In July of 2021, when I first joined MSU, the Governor's Council on Climate Solutions was just in the final stages of drafting the My Healthy Climate Plan, which many of you might know as the state's plan to achieve net zero carbon by 2050. So I knew that mass timber had an important role to play in decarbonizing buildings and contributing to climate solutions on natural and working lands. And it would be really powerful if the My Healthy Climate Plan included mass timber in some way. I also knew that even though some members of the council and its subcommittees might know about and even be interested in mass timber, it wasn't going to be on their list of priorities because it was still so new in Michigan at the time, and they had other priorities to focus on. So even though I had at that time just returned to Michigan after being away for 23 years and at the risk of being perceived an interloper, I asked to join a subcommittee of the Council on Climate Solutions. And so that was great that they accepted me. And by offering myself as a resource on mass timber, a voice for mass timber, I was able to help focus some of the existing interest in including something about mass timber in the plan, and to build a connection with one of the committee's co-chairs that really helped keep mass timber in the conversation, even when I was not in the room. So the end result was that mass timber is in fact mentioned 3 times in the My Healthy Climate Plan as a tool in the state's toolkit to achieve net zero carbon. And although the plan doesn't mandate any particular action related to mass timber, it's still very helpful for policymakers to know that it's in the plan, and for advocates, such as real estate developers who are early adopters of mass timber, for example, for these people to be able to point to mass timber in the plan when they're making a case for, say, incentives or tax rebates or something else that would help make early adoption of mass timber easier for them. Importantly, being a part of that subcommittee did enable me to develop a lot of new relationships with people who have become valuable collaborative colleagues, including the co-chair of the subcommittee, Scott Whitcomb, who now leads the Michigan Department of Natural Resources Office of Public Lands, which has become our program's closest state partner, as well as a significant funder of our outreach and stakeholder engagement work and some of our research projects as well. So really invite yourself, invite yourself. The other thing I want to share is that, if your research or your work portfolio offers something that people can interact with, like physically, they can see it, they can be in it, they can see and they can touch it. Look for opportunities to expose your decision makers to that, right? It's like seeing is believing. So I'm really fortunate that MSU does have one of the first and still certainly the most ambitious mass timber buildings in Michigan. And our program has been able to really successfully leverage that building as a learning laboratory for a broad range of industry stakeholders and students, educators, other folks. But really providing tours of this building for policymakers and policy implementers and other decision makers has really been an invaluable opportunity, right? So we've got these elected officials, these decision makers in kind of a relaxed environment. It's casual. They're not sitting at their desks. You're not really going to ask them for something, probably. You can walk around, and we get to educate them about mass timber while they are seeing and touching and even like smelling it themselves, that smell of wood. And this is really a powerful experience, right? Sometimes usually the legislators don't do this, but sometimes when we give tours, we see people like hugging a mass timber column, for example. People really respond to this. So we're able to bring them in there. And so next time after this tour, somebody brings mass timber to their attention, they will have that sensory and experiential memory. Yeah. So I've hosted tours that were set up by others, by MSU Government Affairs, by the College of Ag and Natural Resources, sometimes by lobbyists who have clients that are focused on mass timber, people who are developing mass timber projects, or even by the request of legislators themselves. Sometimes they're like, hey, I want to come and see this building and learn about mass timber. But I don't always wait for people to ask me to do a tour, for example. When I learned that IPPSR was hosting part of its legislative leadership program in the STEM facility a few years ago, I saw it as a great chance to introduce mass timber to some, green legislators. More than 24, I think, of them were going to be attending that. And also I knew that, kind of legislator boot camp was going to be a memorable time in their new legislative career. So I was like, oh, I gotta talk to these folks about mass timber while they're in the STEM building. So I reached out to Arnold or Matt and asked if I could kind of invite myself to their party, and they said yes. And that tour was amazing. It was a really big hit. I've had numerous legislators approach me since at events because they remember me as the mass timber lady. And I think just really, again, making sure that you're asking to have audience with those folks. You're asking the people who have kind of control over those audiences. If you can come to the party is super useful. And then now I'm just going to talk about a few impacts that we've seen at the state level. So in addition to the My Healthy Climate Plan example I mentioned previously, we've seen more than $750,000 invested in mass timber at MSU's programs and research by the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. So again, really building on that relationship that sparked during the My Healthy Climate Plan drafting process. Something else cool that happened was the governor's office requested, and I was able to provide a list of recommendations that, if implemented, would help advance the mass timber economy in Michigan. So far, we haven't seen any direct action taken on those, but that level of awareness at that level of government is very, very cool and important. In the fiscal year 2025 budget, we saw the legislature allocate $1 million to help expand the Michigan mass timber economy. That's not a huge amount of money, but these dollars are going to be programmed by the Michigan DNR Office of Public Lands, and we'll hopefully be able to demonstrate that there's a demand for these types of dollars, and perhaps the legislature would feel compelled to program more dollars to help incentivize mass timber statewide. Another interesting and important detail is that we have developed collaborative relationships with the Michigan Bureau of Construction Codes. And while these are not elected officials, they have a lot of power over what's happening in our building codes. So we saw the adoption late last year of a new Michigan building code that includes 3 new types of mass timber buildings, along with all of the other things in the building code. And we also have a collaborative relationship with the State Bureau of Fire Safety that's starting to help prepare those plan reviewers in that agency for more mass timber projects coming across their desks. So really providing education and information to help ensure that at the state level in these agencies, folks are making decisions based on accurate and current information. And then finally, we're seeing more mass timber buildings that the state is building. So the DNR completed a mass timber building in the Upper Peninsula. It just opened this month that includes the first mass timber made from Michigan wood. So that's very exciting. And we have at least 2 other state buildings under construction or in development using mass timber. And while this is not necessarily related to policymaking, overall demand in Michigan for mass timber has increased tremendously since 2021. When our STEM facility was built, it was only the 2nd building in the state to use the most important type of mass timber called cross-laminated timber. We now have more than 60 mass timber buildings in the project pipeline statewide, and a community of practice of more than 1,000 practitioners around the state. So, being able to share those types of details with legislators is extremely persuasive and makes a big difference to them when they're thinking about how should we be engaging with mass timber. So that's what I have. I'm looking forward to questions and conversation and hopefully hearing from some of the participants about what they've been up to as well.
Thank you, Sandra. Greatly appreciated. And as you can hear from each of our panelists, all of them have some great perspectives and experiences in advancing their research and their work. And maybe we can get a little bit more into that with Dr. Lamore and Dr. Beverly. Dr. Lamore, I know that recently, in speaking about patients, you've been working with current legislators on a particular piece of legislation near and dear to your heart regarding the circular economy. Why don't you talk a little bit about your experience with that? Because I've watched on the outside, hear you give updates, but it's certainly been a trial of patience.
Yes, and thank you for that. And we're still in there. Senate Bill 704, which expired in December of last year, the last session, would have identified a funding stream, a renewable funding stream to come to Michigan State University from the Solid Waste Management Fund. I know, who knows what that is, right? It's the landfill fee that landfill collects and give to the state, and it renews every year. And so we thought, hey, what if we got a chunk of that to support research, outreach, and instruction for circular economy research? And the work that Sandra and her team are doing in mass timber is an excellent example of reusing materials that would normally end up in a landfill or a waste. Very exciting. And there are team scholars across the campus who are working everything from electronics to plastics to paper to all sorts of materials that are currently going into landfills that we might be able to reuse and repurpose and reduce that solid waste stream. And so we said, hey, what if a portion of that were allocated to MSU on an annual basis to support our research, outreach, and instructional functions? And we've had some support from Senator Singh in getting that bill introduced, and we're looking to have it reintroduced in March as a part of Senator Singh's March package. Then we'll need to work with both our House leadership, and this bill was initially started in the House under a Republican Representative Howe. So it really came from a Republican leadership, and we're hopeful that we can get their support in this, what we believe to be wise investment in our work to help us move to what we call a zero waste society. Very frustrating, very long talk. Patience is the word. We're building our constituent base. We're supporting industry partnerships around this. We're meeting with the chamber next week on it. And we're talking to Eagle about it. That's the Environment, Great Lakes Energy folks in the department, because this would be a gouge on their revenue stream. So just as just to bring it back to the IPPSR program, IPPSR helped us with a companion piece on this. The governor has proposed increasing the state's tipping fee. Michigan's tipping fee, this is like 36 cents a ton, which the average in the Great Lakes is $5 a ton. So you can see that we're well below the Great Lakes average. And as a result, we see a lot of imported trash. And so IPPSR helped us fund a public opinion survey to assess the public's interest in this. And generally, we find the public doesn't know anything about it. It's one of those hidden fees that they don't really pay attention to when it's paid. And so there's a lot of public education that needs to go on around this. And then when you add additional activities that might be supported with the additional revenues that might be generated through this, like environmental cleanup activities or more circular work, then the public's interest in paying an additional fee actually increases. But it's still a bit of a challenge. And so right now where we are with this, we're meeting with some of the Eagle folks to help them see the public sentiment that IPPSR helped us reveal about increasing this fee, but the sentiment the public also expressed in terms of if the additional revenues were used to expand environmental recycling efforts, then maybe we'd be willing to accept this. And so it's gotten a little more complicated, but we're hanging in there, and it's a good idea. And it's something the state ought to invest in. So that's what keeps us motivated. And we got good partners.
Thanks, Rex. Dr. Beverly, yeah, you're not just your professional life, but your personal life too, being a former member of the Lansing Board of Education, clearly indicates your passion for that subject matter and that discipline. How has that, can you talk a bit about how that's intersected in terms of your efforts with advancing policy in any number of areas?
Thanks, Arnold. I like to call myself a recovering school board member, so appreciate that. Yeah, 6 years on the Lansing Board of Education was a wonderful opportunity. Honored to have received the support of local community to advocate for issues around education and schooling on a localized level. Being a product of the Lansing School District, it was a passion project to engage at the board table, bringing some additional expertise to those conversations, particularly around policy. I will say that opportunity again, it expanded my own kind of personal and professional network. So have built really strong relationships with legislators in and around Lansing. Being an elected official myself, have been able to leverage those relationships in a number of ways. Again, advocating for the profession as a whole, specifically thinking about getting some more resources into rural communities. I previously spoke to the Rural Schools Report that David Arson published, and we helped to distribute and support. That Rural Schools Report led to some collective advocacy among rural superintendents, helping we convened with them, helping them to get some talking points together to engage legislators that eventually ended up in Senate Bill 173 of 2023 that allowed for an additional $125 million specifically for transportation in rural communities, which then freed up general fund dollars to support classrooms and mental health programs in those communities. So we saw that as a win. I did want to kind of piggyback on some of the points that Rex and Sandra lifted. Rex talked about before the ask, not just showing up with your hand out. I would suggest showing up with an offer. Here's some things that you could bring to the table, whether it's expertise, whether it's helping them kind of study some issues that they have focused on as a priority as a part of their platform would be one way. Sandra talked about inviting policymakers to campus to view the STEM building. I would say also go to the policymakers, to their constituency, meet with them at their constituent hours, right? Show that you want to be a part of their kind of larger community, and as you advocate for or share whatever your research may be pointing towards. I would then say get a feel for the legislative calendar, right? Think about when the appropriations process and how that plays out and where you might be able to fit in if you're advocating for a specific budget item or policy topic. Like, get familiar with the legislative calendar, and then track issues that you care about on the Michigan Legislature's website. I'm going to drop a link to that here in the chat, but actually track the bills that you care about and find ways to, attend hearings and meet with folks who are actually talking about, real life issues in real time at the policy level.
Thank you, Dr. Beverly. And I want to thank the three of you for taking time to be with us here today and give your perspectives. Fantastic experiences that you've had with some great advice. I don't see anyone's hands up or any questions in the chat, but now would be that time to ask our panelists any particular questions you might have about their experiences and your own thoughts about approaching the legislature. So if any one of you with us would like to do that, raise your hand. Well, let me just say that, yeah, Rex.
I have a question for the group today, and I would appreciate responses. Do others feel the frustration that reason and empirical evidence seems to be less influential in the decision-making process than we might have thought in the past? It just seems to me we're in a policy-making environment right now that reason and rationality just have really fallen off the table. Am I just sensitive, or do others feel this?
Well, before everyone's hands go up or thumbs go up, I think that it's a reality. But I want to say that given my experiences working in and around policy and Michigan politics, we got to keep plugging away. We've get that, as frustrating and Rex, you noted the patience that one has to have, but as frustrating as this time might be, we just need to make sure that we are putting out that kind of research and information. Good research leads to good public policy. That's it. And good public policy, I believe, leads to good politics. And so we just need to keep plugging away. That's all. I do have a hand up. Let's see. Jill.
Yeah, hi. So Sandra had shared that one of the things that she recommends is inviting yourself to the room. And then my question was, well, how do you know what room you're supposed to go to, right? Like, what's the process there? But I feel like Dr. Beverly started to answer like how you get started on that with your response. Is there anything else you would like to expand on, Sandra, as it relates to knowing which rooms to be in?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I will say that I am not a very formal person when it comes to like doing like stakeholder maps. I should be more formal, but I'm not that formal. But one thing you could do is start looking at legislators and trying to map your interests onto them. And then, like, oh, this group of legislators is interested in this thing that we work on. Oh, these people might be interested in this one. And, really keeping a list and tracking it. But then also thinking about what kinds of events, like starting to look for what types of events those folks participate in, which conversations are they in. And then, finding out which ones seem like they might have openings for you. It never hurts to ask.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you ask in a nice way.
IPPSR can certainly help with that as well.
Yes.
Okay.
If you're working on a particular project let us know. Um, we can help steer you to appropriate legislators who have that interest. And I also I, I need to mention MSU's governmental affairs team as well. They're always very helpful with these kinds of efforts. In particular, Rebecca DeVoe, who is our Vice President for Governmental Affairs, Katie Johns, who's our associate in that office as well. They're also great resources when it comes to this. But aside from your colleagues and others you may know that have had such experiences, such as the three you've met here today, IPPSR as well should be on your list of reference points.
And Jill, I know you mentioned earlier you're sitting in a comms leadership seat and trying to figure out like how to bring comms to bear on this piece of your, you know,
Yeah.
entity's portfolio. I've sat in that seat too many times and, you know, thinking about policy strategy from that perspective. So feel free to reach out to me. I'd love
Oh,
to
thank
chat.
you. Thank you. I appreciate that, Sandra. Yeah, were you going to say
Yeah.
something, Beverly?
Yeah, I was going to
Dr.
offer,
Beverly?
engaging associations that are, connected to a particular topic or advocacy issue area. They're always great partners. They also have, established networks. Those that I know are always willing to have a conversation and thought partner around, strategies to engage. So I would not leave them off the list either.
Thank you. If appropriate, I have one more question.
Go ahead.
Do you have examples of what you would consider a successful policy brief or a resource I can go to view something of that nature? I have been involved in creating I'm going to call them policy briefs for ARCS kids that have been really successful. They have included, you know, quotes, pictures, like they've been very heavily designed, which I think helped make them successful, but I have never really seen a policy brief.
I'm happy to connect with you and share some resources if that's helpful. I'll drop my email here in the chat as well.
Thank you so much.
Great. Any other questions or thoughts from our panelists or our attendees? Matt, anything else you want to add?
I guess I'll just address Rex's question that there definitely is a there definitely is a more politicized information environment. If you look at public opinion, it's very partisan difference now in terms of trust of universities and trust of scientists and trust of researchers. But we don't bear full responsibility or even major responsibility for that, but we do bear some. So part of our goal is to try to work on the part that we have some control over and how we're perceived. The other comment I would just make is sort of, it really depends on what the baseline is. If your baseline is, we have research and that research mostly tells us which policies work and which don't, and we should compare policy that exists to that baseline, you're always going to be disappointed. But if you think about our role in the policy process is what's our role compared to other people who have information and thoughts about how public policy should be designed, then we're in quite a privileged position. We have a much stronger ability to impact the policy process than do a lot of other people, including people who are directly affected by those policies. So I would just keep both of those baselines in mind. We do want to think about, what research-guided policy would look more like, and what would happen if policymakers paid more attention to researchers. But we also want to keep in mind the baseline that we are in this more privileged position in the public trust where we have more influence than other kinds of constituencies because of our knowledge and expertise.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank University Outreach and Engagement, Dr. Miles McNall, and the Broader Impacts Program for this opportunity. attendees and those who registered for this program will receive any notes or PowerPoints as well. And this recording will also be posted on at least the IPPSR website. Miles, any closing thoughts?
No, I just want to thank you, Matt, and our wonderful panelists for a very insightful conversation.
Thank you all very much and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks,
Thanks for
everyone.
having us.
Thank you.